Welcome to HealthBeat, your source for health and wellness information, sponsored by Roper St. Francis Healthcare. I'm Angela May. We are days away from the world-class 10K race in Charleston. Whether you plan to run or walk, find out everything you need to know about protecting your feet before you hit the pavement. That's next. One Charleston tradition is the Cooper River Bridge Run, now in its 31st year. It's happening on April 4th, and tens of thousands of people take part in the Bridge Run, either to race across it or walk across the bridge span. Now, some people go home with foot injuries afterwards, but you don't have to be one of them this year. Joining us today to talk about injury prevention, we have board-certified podiatrist Adam Brown joining us today to talk about what we need to do as we prepare for the Bridge Run, which is right around the corner.
It's coming up soon.
Yeah, but before we get into all of that, we also have to underline the fact that not only are you an expert in your field, but you are also an avid runner. Give us a little bit of background about how long you've been running.
I started probably around 7-8 years ago. You know, I grew up playing all kinds of sports. College baseball, and then once I was done with that, I kind of had a couple of years where I didn't do enough to stay in shape. So running kind of got me back in it. Team in training is an area you can go to basically train for a marathon. It's the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. That got me back into running. From there, I trained for a marathon, did the San Diego Marathon several years ago, and once you get caught up in running like that, you'll never stop, and I haven't stopped since.
Well, good for you. So you definitely speak as a podiatrist and a runner. So thank you for being on the show. Now, there are several common injuries that you say plague bridge runners and walkers at the end of the race. Let's go over some of those and start first with the stress fracture. How exactly does it feel, and then how does it happen?
Typically, it can start during training. It's usually sort of a dull ache on the top of the foot. It may come somewhere in the middle of your run. Towards the end of your run, you start to feel it. You get off it feels a little better, and what will typically happen over a week or two is that as you're running, it'll settle in. That dull ache will start quicker and quicker during your run, and so you kind of know something's getting worse until eventually, if the bone fractures all the way through, now you're not really looking to walk on it or definitely not run on it.
Wow, and just a few moments ago we popped up an image, an x-ray image of a stress fracture right there. Where exactly is the stress fracture in that picture? The area kind of in the middle of the picture, the area where what you have there is a big rounded area of bone callus that forms around the outside of the fracture. It's kind of your body's way to wall off the fracture. It's sort of like an internal cast that prevents movement, and that's usually, the picture there is about a month after the stress fracture developed. All right, now another common injury, it does not have a common name. It's called a sub-2 capsulitis. Tell us about that one.
Sub-2 capsulitis is basically an overload or too much pressure going to an area in the ball of your foot, usually at the bottom or the base of the second toe. You can see there where the area is marked. Very common to develop that, especially when you're running on inclines or declines. So the bridge is especially prevalent for this type of injury, where again it's an overload to that spot. The tissues underneath there get inflamed, they get swollen, you get some pain, you can get some numbness going up into the toe even. Typically we like to treat that with ice, offload it with some padding, make sure you have proper shoe gear.
And that particular injury, the sub-2 capsulitis, can be confused or mistaken for a different kind of foot injury, right?
A common area in the bottom of the foot that people have heard of is a neuroma or a Morton's neuroma, which usually occurs more at the base of the third and fourth toe, more on the outer part of the foot. But also it can be burning, also it can give you numbness. So yeah, commonly people come into the office, they've gone on the internet already, so they see the burning, they read about it, and they figure they have a neuroma. And more times than not, it's the sub-2 capsulitis.
Right. Don't self-diagnose yourself
Correct.
Based on what you read on the internet.
It happens a lot.
All right. Well, we're going to highlight some other common common injuries in just a moment. But first, what are some of the common mistakes that the race participants make that lead to some of these injuries that we're highlighting today?
The most common is usually just lack of training. You get the bridge run is coming up, you have 2-3 weeks left to get ready.
And it's not a small race. I mean, this is
not.
the 10K, 6.2 miles, and that can take a toll.
And also the incline and decline. That also adds increased loads to the foot, to the knees, the rest of the body. So, the most common definitely is not giving your body the proper time to train. Most of the time the tissues in the body can adjust to pressure, to increase load if you do it over a extended period of time. But getting it in quick doesn't always work so well.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit later in the show about how to prevent some of these injuries. But let's talk about runner's toe. That's a very common one.
Very common, and even more common again after the bridge run. The inclines and the declines, what happens typically is that you jam up into the front of your shoe, so the pressure goes to the toe, and the nail can turn black or purple. And really what's happening is that blood is forming under the nail. A lot of times there can be a lot of pressure there, so if people come into the office soon after the run, sometimes we have to release it by putting a little hole in the nail and letting the blood kind of get out of there.
Once it gets to that point, like in the image that we're looking at, I mean, you pretty much can kiss that toenail goodbye, right?
Correct. You probably have a 50% chance of it falling off over the next month. And usually you can let that happen. I mean, usually you don't need to see someone if it's not hurting you. If it looks like that soon after the run, you give it some time and it'll grow off.
All right, and there are easy ways to prevent that, and we'll get into that later. What about tendon injuries? Those are also pretty common.
Very common, both on the inside of the ankle and the outside of the ankle. And again, same thing, overtraining or lack of training. You have to listen to your body. As you're training for the bridge run or any run or even getting out there and starting, there's a good picture. That's called the posterior tibial tendon, which runs along the inside part of the ankle. Very commonly, people develop swelling, tenderness all along, basically the course of that tendon that we have drawn there. They come in and it hurts just to step up. They get up in the morning and they can barely even put their foot down until it loosens up a little bit.
Oh, yikes. And plantar fasciitis.
Plantar fasciitis is probably the most common thing I see in the office, both before or for the training and following the run, and it is an increased load or increased strain to a ligament that sits along the bottom of the foot. So a lot of people term it heel spur, so they may say, I have a heel spur, and that's kind of what they call heel pain, but it's actually the plantar fascia, which is a band, again, that sits along the bottom. It really gets strained when you're going up hills. So the bridge, again, can lead to quick overload in that area.
Bottom line, to avoid all of this, you got to have the proper training. Now, coming up after the break, Dr. Brown is going to explain how to protect yourself from these common injuries. Your footwear is a key element to injury prevention.